Alright, so today is finally all about the Steam Machine, and not hypothetically, not what I hope happens with the box whenever it gets here someday. I actually now have one in hand, and I've spent about the past week getting some hands-on experience with the Steam Machine, and doing my best to put it through its paces. But first, how did I even get my hands on a Steam Machine, considering I'd already made some community posts here on the channel about how I wasn't selected to order in that first batch? Well, Valve did not smile upon me and just magically decide that yes, it was time for me to order a 2TB machine. Rather, my good friend Maro, who is an absolute legend, put me in touch with her friend, Priyanka, who by association is also an absolute legend now, and she actually got offered the 512 gig to order. She did not need it, so she went ahead and let me have it. So Maro, Priyanka, if you guys are watching, thank you so much for helping me out here, because honestly, I didn't think I was going to be able to make any videos about hands-on with the Steam Machine until like 2027 at this point. And I've been absolutely dying to get my hands on this hardware and check it out since about 6 weeks ago when it first went live, not just because I'm excited for it on its own merit, or because I saw some content creation opportunities, although both of those things are definitely true, but also because I had just completely or nearly completely avoided all video content about the Steam Machine, whether it was reviews or hands-on impressions, because I didn't want that to really paint, what my perspective was going to be on the machine until I got some real hands-on time with it and could check it out for myself. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is just going over my hands-on impressions with the Steam Machine over about the past week or so. This is not a full-blown review or anything like that. That will be coming probably in about a month or so, I'd say, after I really put the system through its paces, but yeah, for now I'm just going to go over some of the basics of what my time has been like with the Steam Machine so far. So let's go ahead and kick this off with what's in the box. Now, I got the 512GB version with a controller. I don't really need to do a full unboxing of the controller since I already did a whole dedicated video on that a few weeks back, but unboxing the Steam Machine itself was definitely an experience, and I have to say the materials for the boxes that they use for shipping these units definitely feel incredibly high quality. I wouldn't say they're overly flashy, right? It's not the same as opening something like an Apple product where, they're trying to position that as like this prestigious kind of luxury status item or something like that. Rather, it just feels like all of the money for the packaging for the Steam Machine just went to making sure it was rock solid and delivering you a very safe machine, and that's exactly what I found on the inside. It's pretty basic cardboard, but it's also extremely high quality cardboard, and everything feels incredibly protected. And once you actually crack into the box, you're going to find some documentation, a power cable, an HDMI cable, and of course the system itself. Pretty Spartan stuff. I do kind of wish they would have included like some stickers or something like that, especially with how much Valve has made it a point to kind of show off how you can customize your Steam Machine with different faceplates, or just the standard faceplate with a whole bunch of stickers all over it. Could have been a nice inclusion, but whatever. And I have to say that getting this thing out of its box initially was just so exciting and also so frustrating, because obviously I just wanted to hook it up immediately and just start tearing into it, but I did take some time to at least film some B-roll of me actually opening the system, some close-ups on some of the ports that you can see here, and once I got done filming a bunch of pretty B-roll of the Steam Machine, then I decided to go ahead and go through the setup process, which predictably was butter smooth. And after getting this thing powered on and connected to my local network and signing in through Steam, at that point every other piece of the setup also went incredibly smoothly. I had no problem downloading the latest software updates for the Steam Machine, and no issues whatsoever connecting the included Steam controller to it and getting the puck to be detected. And then after that, I decided to go ahead and pair it with the Steam Machine directly and bypass the puck entirely, which I'll probably still use the puck for charging because it is fairly convenient, I guess. And I have to admit, even though I really like the design of the Steam controllers I pointed out in that original video and the way the puck functions, I have to say it was nice just having it directly paired to the machine the same way you would expect with like a regular video game console. The only thing is, I will say that it is still somewhat confusing for me to think about all the different connectivity options for the Steam controller to the Steam Machine. For instance, I believe you can connect it through Bluetooth, you can do it through the puck, which is a dedicated 2.4 GHz wireless receiver if I'm remembering correctly, but then also, and I don't think I knew this, I believe the Steam Machine has basically a built-in puck that has the same function, so you don't necessarily need to use that external puck with it unless, again, you want to use it for charging or something like that. And considering each one of the Steam controllers has 2 puck slots built into it so it can connect to 2 different systems, like say a Steam Machine and a Steam Deck, I think what that means is the internal puck on the machine that I'm technically connected to right now counts as one of those slots despite the fact that it's not external. So yeah, even though it was rock solid in terms of setup and easy to get up and going with the Steam Machine, it was at least a little bit confusing on the controller front, and that's something I probably need to iron out. And while I was definitely tempted to just dive straight away into my library and start downloading and installing a ton of games that maybe didn't do so great on the Steam Deck to see how they performed on the Steam Machine, it occurred to me right in the middle of the setup process that I don't even really need to do that because I can just pop the SD card out of my Steam Deck, put that into the Steam Machine, and it should work, right? And sure enough, every game that I had installed on that card when I was using with the Steam Deck came up just fine on the Steam Machine. So after I knew I already had a range of games that I could start firing up and playing and filming for B-roll here for this video, the other thing that I did was take a 5TB passport drive and plug it into the rear of the system to see if I had actually managed to successfully copy my emulation setup from my Steam Deck to that external drive, and I wanted to see if I plugged it into the Steam machine, if I could just download EmuDeck, install it, point it at that drive, and have everything be detected correctly, and it absolutely did. Which is great, because I was already planning on doing a video both about refining my emulation setup, and then secondarily, I wanted to do a video about how to move your emulation setup from the Steam Deck to the Steam machine, and I was really glad to see that that went so well, and that I could use an external hard drive for it, rather than the SD card, since obviously that leaves the SD card slot on the front completely free to just run Steam games. And considering I have the 512 gig model, I'm definitely going to be making good use of that SD card slot. The only weird thing that I found in copying over my whole EmuDeck setup from the deck to the Steam machine was that I did notice that some of the duplicates I'd already resolved for my PS1 games had reappeared there, but thankfully I don't have like hundreds of PS1 games or anything like that, so it's easy enough for me to just go ahead and fire up Emulation Station, and then just hide that entry so it looks cleaner in the interface once more. But yeah, overall, just unboxing this thing and getting it powered up and configured on the network and logging in and grabbing all of my different games for both emulation purposes and the native Steam stuff really did go off without a hitch, and I'm very pleased with the setup process. So after I finally got everything set up and I was ready to start filming me actually playing some games on this thing, the first thing that I decided I would fire up was Doom: The Dark Ages. One, because it is sort of a beefy, taxing game, and two, I already had some idea of how it performed on the Steam Deck, where it was kind of stuck at 30 FPS, so here I wanted to see if I could crank it up to like ultra nightmare settings and what kind of performance I would get at a reasonable 1080p. Obviously at 4K I wasn't going to do that, but at 1080p it did run pretty much flawlessly, staying consistently in like the mid 50s to, well, 60 FPS. I also fired up the 2018 Spider-Man. I wish I'd installed Spider-Man Miles Morales for something that was a little bit more advanced than the 2018 original, but whatever, it's still a game that didn't necessarily run amazingly well on the Steam Deck, right? It was competent in so much as you could get roughly 30 FPS most of the time, depending on what was going on screen, but here I would say it ran almost flawlessly by comparison. For the most part, it was just head and shoulders above what I'd ever gotten out of the Steam Deck, and while I wouldn't say that the visual fidelity is on par with the PlayStation 5 Pro, because I think that would be way too much of a stretch and probably a really well documented one at this point, I will say nothing about it looked glaringly ugly to me or anything like that. Now, pound for pound, if you put them side by side, could I personally tell the difference? Yes, I absolutely could. But would I say that what I was getting out of the Steam machine looked bad compared to the PlayStation 5 Pro? No, not at all. And then finally, the last big beefy game that I wanted to play was also from 2018, and I was so excited for this game in particular, and I kept dreaming about this being the game that I would fire up on the Steam machine whenever I got my grubby little hands on it, and that is Red Dead Redemption 2. Because it's not like I couldn't play Red Dead Redemption 2 in my living room, but because it never got patched to be anything above a locked 30 FPS on the PlayStation 4, any time that I wanted to experience this game in the best visual fidelity meant I would either have to pull up back here and play on an actual gaming rig, which is not my favorite way to play games, and that's why I've always been more of a console gamer than a PC gamer to begin with, but now I'm able to play that in a comparable fidelity in the middle of my living room, and at 60 FPS no less, which is absolutely wonderful for a game that just looks this staggering. Beyond that, I also fired up a few 2D indie games as well. Obviously, those are going to run just fine on hardware that's 6 times as powerful as the Steam Deck, but it's also cool because I could run a few of those games in 4K and get 60 FPS or beyond without breaking a sweat, which is probably to be expected and maybe not that novel. Now, on the emulation front, I've really only spent time playing some more Silent Hill 3, which I talked about in that Vitcher video from a couple of weeks back, but then beyond that, I also did just kind of hop around a lot to make sure all of my games would still fire up, the same way I didn't have any issues on the Steam Deck, since that's where I had migrated the installation from. And I have to say, the emulation aspect might be my favorite thing about the Steam machine so far. One of the other things that I said that I wanted to play when I did that video some time back about like the types of games that I wanted to play on the Steam machine was that I really wanted to play like couch co-op games, or, you know, go back and do, like emulated games with 2 players locally. And I got to do a little bit of that because my mom and I played some RBI baseball from 1987 on the NES, just like when I was a kid, and it was excellent to return to that game. Still the best baseball game of all time, in my personal opinion. And then on the flip side, I also got to watch my dad play a little bit of F-Zero, which was one of his favorites from back in the day on the Super Nintendo. And then my buddy Ryan, who I consider to be an absolute connoisseur of gaming, also got to put some time in playing Symphony of the Night and got absolutely addicted to it immediately, which honestly I probably should have expected it since it's like one of his favorite games of all time. But yeah, all this is to say, initially I did not have any problems firing up the games that I wanted to check out on the Steam machine, and in almost every case they worked great. And I did want to talk a little bit about how it performed as a console, right? Not raw performance from like a visual standpoint for gaming, rather does it feel like a console when you actually have it positioned in your living room setting? setup, and so far, I think it's pretty much nailing it. I will say the Steam OS UI navigation definitely feels snappier on the Steam machine. Also, in the handful of titles that I've tested so far, like Red Dead 2 or Doom the Dark Ages, I will say if I tried to put it to sleep in the middle of playing a game and then tried to wake the system back up, I did want to see, can I just jump right back into the game without any issue, and so far that has held true. And for the most part, the controller connections have remained consistently reliable, although I will say in at least one instance I did get a quick dropout and then a reconnect. The only thing that I think could be at play here is potentially that spinning drive that I'm using for my emulation setup. That could be interfering with the wireless signal, but I'll have to do some further research on that to see if that's the case or not, because aside from that one tiny hiccup, almost all the other time that I spent with the system so far has remained completely reliable in terms of that controller connection. But now let's go through a little bit of early pros and cons. For starters, I absolutely love the way the system looks aesthetically, and it just feels like this dense little tesseract of a cube that is capable of bringing your entire Steam library into your living room. And I do love the light bar on the front of the system. It gives you a ton of customization options for it in terms of what the animations are going to look like, how bright you want it to be, whether it's enabled. It is kind of a bummer that it does not turn on apparently in desktop mode, which I was surprised by, but I guess that's a minor complaint. And again, I definitely appreciate that the setup process to get up and running was completely effortless, and I'm positive that it took me longer to get set up for the PlayStation 5 or the Series X a few years back. And naturally, I love that I was able to just plug a 5TB drive into the back of this thing and be up and running with emulation in just a few minutes, something I definitely can't do with most of the consoles in my collection. Now, in terms of the negatives I've encountered so far, one thing that I didn't really think about when I first checked out the Steam controller is that it doesn't have an indicator externally of what controller slot it is, and on at least one occasion when I had both controllers paired to the Steam machine, I had them both powered on and I could not remember which one was in the 1 slot and which one was in the 2 slot, which normally wouldn't be a huge deal except for I was doing some emulation stuff and the second controller was not working for some reason, so yeah, I do kind of wish that the Steam controller had some external indicator, but to be fair, you can dig into the settings and there is an option to identify which controller you're holding with a tone, but it's just weird that it takes that many steps to figure that out, so I'll probably just have to put a sticker on it or something. Also, because this is technically a PC and not a console, despite how well they've managed to embrace that console form factor, you do still have to deal with launchers and stuff for games like Cyberpunk, or Far Cry, or Grand Theft Auto, or Red Dead. And even though I have not had to reach for an actual mouse and keyboard to interact with the Steam machine nearly as much as I thought I would, I do still feel better keeping those things nearby, so I wouldn't say that it has completely negated the need for, a keyboard and mouse, despite the fact that it has touchpads with the ability to bring up an on-screen keyboard, but, that's to be expected, right? What's the big thing that you get from the Steam machine that you don't get from consoles? Openness, flexibility, the ability to install whatever you want, and of course to do emulation. And finally, the last negative that I'll say is I can't deny it is a bit of a letdown when you play a game like, say, Spider-Man, and you can feel that it's not performing quite as good as it would on something like the PlayStation 5 Pro. It's not an absolute deal breaker, right? There's still tons of value that I'm going to get out of the system, but I can't deny there is just like a little tinge of disappointment whenever you see that there's a game that you played on like something like the Series X and it looks very, very good, and then you play on this and it still looks really good, just not quite as good. But at the end of the day, going in with the properly calibrated expectations that I defined for myself, I have to say I'm absolutely loving it so far. But to be fair, this impressions piece is really only telling you half the story, right? It's easy for me to talk about how great the system is when I very carefully lit it in like a studio environment and, tried to play it under optimal conditions and show you games that run well, but how does it do where it actually is going to live in an actual living room setup? Well, that's probably what I'll dig into more deeply whenever I get to the review video, because that video will be where I put the system more fully through its paces, and can say that I put, weeks and weeks of time into hanging out with the Steam machine instead of just a few days of me chattering on excitedly because I've got a new toy to play with. Because honestly, for most people, that's where the Steam machine is probably going to live. So rather than pretend that a few excited days with it tells me everything I need to know, I'm just going to put it through its paces out here for the next month, games, emulation, couch co-op, big screen performance, just using it like an actual living room console. And then I will come back and tell you what I think of it more fully once that honeymoon phase is finally over. But for now though, at least initially I have to say, yep, I'm pretty impressed with the Steam machine so far, and I absolutely cannot wait to spend more time with it. But that's going to be it for this one. As always, thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch videos here on my channel. It really does mean a lot to me. And also, again, to Mario and Priyanka, thank you so much for putting this together and getting this system over here for me. I've been dying to get my hands on it, and now I can finally get some hands-on time with the Steam machine. So, yeah, again, that's it for this one. Take care, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.